Welcome back, everybody. We're going to look at a video today called Who Sank the Vasa? I think that's how you pronounce it. Obviously, nobody sank it. That was not what happened. But I'm actually really interested in how exactly this happened. I know the general story of it, but I don't totally understand what happened. So, I'm interested to get into it. I've never done any videos by this channel. It's called Atomic Frontiers, I believe. This will be my first one that I've ever looked at. I'm really interested to see what they come up with, so let's jump into it.
On August 10th, 1628, this was the most powerful weapon in the world. 20 minutes later, it was at the bottom of Stockholm Harbour. There aren't any physical signs of damage. The wood hasn't been set ablaze, ripped apart by a reef, or blown apart with cannons.
God, I would love to see that in person. I know it's in some museum. I would love to see it. I love the old warships. They're incredible to me. They were, they set countries apart in their era. Warships of this magnitude are very distinct, and I love them.
So why did this warship never see war? Who sank the Vasa?
It never saw a lot.
Let's relive the fateful day of the sinking. After being dragged along the eastern shorefront from the Stepsgarden shipyard, the Vasa was ready to take sail. Named for his family, the Vasa dynasty, King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden was anxious for it to join him fighting in the 30 Years' War. On board are sailors and their families, while along the shore, thousands waited to see the flagship of the Swedish Navy take to the seas. All the gun ports along both the lower and upper decks are opened, ready to fire a salute as the ship leaves Stockholm. After unfurling her sails, she makes her way steadily through the port. Just as she rounds Beckhollen Island, a strong gust of wind makes the ship bank heavily to port. In fact, so far does she lean that the lower gun ports become submerged. As water rushes in, the fate of the ship is sealed, and she sinks in a matter of minutes. Since they hadn't gone very far, most of the passengers and crew make it safely back to shore, where the captain is immediately arrested. Sofring Hansen swears that everything had been tied down properly, and that his crew was sober. So, if the sailors weren't to blame, why did she sink? All ocean vessels operate under the same two forces, weight and buoyancy. To see how these interact, I've created this demonstration. The top tank is filled with water. If any of it gets displaced, it's going to spill out and into the larger container. We'll be able to measure the weight of displaced water using a set of scales. This is an analogue for the Vasa ship. It weighs in at precisely 37 grams. When we place it into the tank, some of the water spills out. How much water? 37 grams of it. We're now adding in some cargo, about 65 grams of it. The extra weight pulls the boat down further, but it doesn't sink. At the same time, more water spills out. How much water? About 65 grams. As you can see, the mass of water displaced is always the same as the mass of the object. That's because displaced water generates buoyancy, which is opposed by the object's mass, which generates weight. In the end, the boat sinks just far enough to exactly counter the extra mass. It was 1625, and King Gustavus had a problem. Up until the 17th century, the Swedish Navy had focused on smaller, faster vessels, well suited for the boarding rather than outright sinking of ships. However, as cannon technology advanced, he saw an opportunity for a new type of warfare. When, during the height of the 30 Years' War, 10 of his ships sank during a storm, Gustavus informed his shipwrights that they would be building a new flagship.
Yeah, and I've talked about this before. I'm of the opinion that early in this era, it might have benefited Sweden to go all in on the Navy instead of land forces like they end up doing. I don't think you could have known that at the time, but now looking back with hindsight, I think that it's not just Sweden. I think any any country that is bordering a major water source, that's the way to go in this era because going forward, it's going to set countries apart. You know, you're getting into really ramped up into the exploration era or discovery era, you know, whatever you would like to call it. But it's not just that, it's not even really power projection. Not in the way that we would understand it today at least. But it does give you some level of, oh, I don't know. You're able to basically get anywhere you want, do whatever you want, you know, within the the bounds of reality. Trade becomes massive because these things can go all over the world. They can, you know, they can literally go everywhere. And so you have trade expand, trade brings in more commerce and money and people, and it's you see some of these cultures really start to expand throughout this era. Well, how do they do it? By ship in a lot of cases.
using the latest in technology. The Vasa was equipped with 64 cannons across 2 gun decks, including 48 of these 24-pounders. At the time, this was the Baltic's largest concentration of artillery on a single vessel. But flagships aren't just about firepower, they're also political statements. You can see on this 1/10 scale replica the brightly coloured ornamentation of the Vasa. Scenes from Roman and Greek antiquity are intertwined with figures from the Old Testament as well as ancient Egypt. All of this propaganda and extra cannons puts a lot of mass high up in the ship. Just having equal forces isn't enough. They've also got to be balanced. In its initial configuration, our boat is really stable. That's because the cargo makes the weight force act through a point that's lower than the buoyancy force. If we tilt it to the side, these forces generate a restorative torque back to the center. On the other hand, if we were to increase the height of the cargo, then it's a lot less stable. Buoyancy acts through the same point, but now the weight force is much higher up. If the ship tips even a little, then this tilt gets magnified. We can prevent tipping in 2 ways. Lower the center of mass by adding in more weight lower down, or by making the base wider, so that it must lean further before falling over. When Gustavus ordered the Vasa to be built, the shipwrights had already started construction on a smaller vessel. Rather than wasting the resources, instead they just extended the already formed keel by 8 meters, bringing total ship length up to 70. In order to compensate for this instability, they added as much ballast as possible. However, the narrower profile of the ship made it much less effective. After 120 tons were added, the ship was sailing too low in the water. Any more mass, and the water would start to spill through the gun ports.
Okay, so this was a shipbuilding thing. It wasn't, I didn't know that. I guess I had just assumed that it was an event or a mistake or something of that nature. But it's, I mean, a mistake like by somebody on the ship. But it seems like this all just goes back to shipbuilding. They made a mistake when they were putting it together. Even if it had survived, I mean, it's probably lucky it went down when it did because if it gets further out, you know, the people on board probably aren't surviving.
Before the Vasa could launch, it had to pass a lurch test. This involves having 30 men run side to side along the deck, making the ship rock back and forth. By doing so, we can infer the relative positioning of the weight and buoyancy forces. In Pirates of the Caribbean, they use an especially exaggerated form of this test to flip the Black Pearl. After just 3 traversals, it was decided that the Vasa was lurching way too far, and the test had to be abandoned. For comparison, it took Jack Sparrow and his crew more than 10 times that amount before their ship would sink. At this stage, someone should probably have told the engineers, or even the king, that the ship was unseaworthy. However, it appears the message never got through, and with Gustavus at war and anxious for the Vasa to join him, the launch date was set for August 10th.
So wait, what? what the hell happened there? Who dropped the ball? If they're going to arrest the captain, you know that somebody was told and just didn't pass the information up the chain for whatever reason. Do we know why? What, like, how did this come about that not just Gustavus didn't know about it, but just somebody in a position of power that could have been like, wait, what? The If you take that out there, it's going to sink in 2 seconds. What the hell are we talking about? Save the manpower and cannons and everything else on the ship that's going to immediately sink when you send it out to sea.
The rest, as they say, is history. So, at the end of the day, who sank the Vasa? The official inquest found that no one was to blame. The captain was just sailing a ship that had indeed passed a test, and was built to specifications outlined by the king himself.
Did it pass the test though? That's what I'm getting at. Was it sounds like it didn't. It sounds like they were all like, "Nope, this is too dangerous. Like it we can't do this anymore." And then they were like, "All right, rubber stamp. There you go. Have a good voyage."
Were the courts really going to accuse the most powerful man in Sweden of sinking his own warship? Probably not.
Okay, I've got to look at some stuff and see dig a little more into this because I'm still a little bit confused about how this got cleared to actually be put out into water. So if anybody knows anything else about this, put it down in the comments because I'm a little bit confused. But the story itself is really interesting. I did not know that was the way that it happened. I knew that it sank, obviously. I knew, kind of what had happened, but not how or why or any of that stuff. So, yeah, any other information, let me know. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here, and I will see you all next time.